During this session, we hope to learn more about and to be inspired how to contribute to a green transition within our respective organizations. We are therefore very, very proud to present Karin Lexén, Secretary General of the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation, and Anna Tibblin, Secretary General of VEffect, to talk about green transition, green development cooperation, and a possible green transition. And at the end of this session, Josefin Sundström, Secretary General at Lexén and EAS Kenya, will share their work for a green transformation, bringing community voices to Stockholm Plus 50, referring the UN conference Stockholm Plus 50. But first, we let over the word to Karin and Anna, and I wonder if you can present yourself and your organization briefly in a couple of minutes. So let's start, Karin, maybe 2 minutes. Please, you're welcome.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you for inviting me. I'm really glad that you bring up this subject to your meeting. So I'm Karin Lexén. I'm the Secretary General of the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation. I've been holding that position for 5 years. My organization is the largest and oldest environmental organization in Sweden if you count on individual membership. We were founded in 1909, and currently we have local groups all over Sweden, and we also work on international issues with a pretty big SIDA-founded program, where we focus, of course, on the interlinkages between environmental issues and human rights and supporting partners in their work doing so.
Okay, thank you, Karin. And Anna Tibblin, can you present yourself and your organization in maybe 2 minutes?
I'll try my best and just say good morning and perhaps good afternoon to some of you, and just a very warm thanks for inviting me, and especially for that introduction, both of the music, and then I like this power woman thing. I don't mind that. So thanks for that extra. I work as the Secretary General for WeEffect, and WeEffect is the Swedish development organization of the Swedish cooperative movement. So like Karin said that she represents the oldest environmental organization, I'd say that the organization I work for is also one of the oldest development organizations in Sweden. We work to support mainly smallholder farmers and their organizations. We work currently with about 200 partners in about 20 countries. And our focus in that work is on the right to food. So we support farmers' organizations and everything that has to do with local production, access to markets and so on, but also to become more resilient to confront the climate crisis, meet needs here and now, but also to be able to withstand future pandemics, climate-related shocks and challenges that we all know will come. In our work, we also have a very strong focus on gender equality, because we know that equality is not only a precondition for justice, but also for a sustainable economic development. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Anna and Karin, for the introduction of yourself and the organizations. We have prepared some questions to you, and now you have the time to profound a little bit. We don't have so much time, so maybe 5-7 minutes on each question, maybe if you can reflect on that. So the first question we have shared with you is, how do you and your organization relate to green development cooperation and a possible green transition? We can start with Karin, if you can reflect on that very broad question in the 5-7 minutes, and or maybe we can have a kind of dialogue also with Karin, with Anna.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to be brief in order to let us have a dialogue as well. Of course, this challenge is at the heart of what we are doing in our organization. And firstly, I'm sure we are all aware of that we have two major environmental challenges. We have the climate challenge that, of course, also is hitting developing countries and poor countries the most. In parallel, we have the loss of biodiversity, or we could call it the ecological crisis, or the crisis for our ecosystems. And my organization is deeply engaged and involved in advocating for the need and the necessity to solve these two crises simultaneously, and not trying to solve climate change while sort of depleting biodiversity. That is not the way to go. And there are many examples that we could bring up. For instance, we can see the Amazonas as one of the examples where deforestation is a big threat to climate change, but of course also a big threat to poor people, small farm holders, etc. So thereby you can also see that the environmental crisis is interlinked to the challenges of poverty and development. So when you look into the need for green aid or green development cooperation, it's really very important to start by saying that you cannot solve the environmental challenges without addressing inequality and poverty. And at the same time, we do know that it is not possible to achieve long-term social sustainability if we are shooting ourselves in our foot and don't deal with the climate change and ecosystem degradation. And as I said before, developing countries are the most vulnerable to all of these changes. And this is, of course, also true when it comes to building back and recovering after the pandemic. That is, we are not really after, we are in the midst of the pandemic. But when we are discussing rebuilding, it's really important to, of course, see the acute needs that we are facing, but we cannot solve the crisis of the pandemic by sacrificing the environmental challenges, because then we will only build something even worse for future. And we also know that many pandemics are interlinked with misuse of animals and how food and how we develop food, and so the disruption of ecosystems is very much interlinked to different diseases and pandemics. And this also shows us that we cannot try to solve just one issue. We need to try to solve them simultaneously. And this is, of course, also a great challenge. But if you want to look into what is then needed and how are we dealing with all of these challenges, then there are sort of number of actions that can be taken. Of course, the first one should be facilitating a just transition for all. And by that, we should look into the responsibility of the rich countries and richer communities as a whole, middle class and lower class people, to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And at the same time, so we need to scale up support for developing countries to shift to renewable energy systems. And for instance, there, one way of hitting two different problems at the same time is, for instance, to secure that energy poverty is dealt with by investing in solar power instead of continuing investing in coal, for instance. This is also something that is much easier to develop on the countryside. You don't need large transformation systems and so forth. So you need to try to solve different issues at the same time. A third issue that you need to do is to finance an inclusive green recovery And then you have to look into how you're building your budgets, what kind of investments you're doing to kickstart the economy again, both in the richer countries, but also in poorer countries, how to reduce and phase out harmful subsidies, etc. And this is something that foreign aid can support. For instance, we're very often discussing with our government how to phase out investments in fossil fuels, also in investments in different or our financing of different programs in development banks, and not the least the World Bank, where we for a long time have been advocating for the World Bank to phase out their subsidies for coal, for instance. And they have taken on that kind of policies now, but we are trying to track what is happening on the ground, and we can see that in some cases, what is happening on the ground is not always the same as the nice papers in Washington, D.C. So we need to follow what is happening on the ground here also. And then it's also very important to help protect and restore much more larger land and sea areas. And this is a tricky area at the same time, and this is a discussion going on. We need to protect and restore, but we need to do it together with local communities and indigenous people. So it's really important that protecting and restoring is combined with respecting human rights, respecting indigenous people's rights, and to do it together with the people that are living in that area. There are very bad examples previously on where people living there have been thrown out in order to protect and restore. And then, of course, what is also really important is Anna was speaking about building resilience and so forth, and of course to support smallholder farmers and to support also sustainable fishing is other components of this sort of green transition and green aid, because you can see, for instance, and I think Anna will speak to that even more, that agroforestry is it's not only helpful in building a system for healthier food, it's also a very good system for building resilience. And we can see examples now during the pandemic where we have partners in, for instance, Kenya and Uganda that are sort of forming the base of their agriculture on agroforestry, that they have come out much better during the pandemic because they are not depending on chemicals and other things that they need to buy. So to conclude, it's really important to meet the challenges that we face on the climate change and loss of biodiversity, but we need to do it in a way where we also secure livelihoods for poor people, and we try to mainstream the environmental challenges in the work that we're doing in reducing poverty and securing food and clean water for all.
Thank you, Karin. So many good thoughts that maybe Anna Tibblin, maybe you can continue. How do you, at your organization, relate to green transition, green development cooperation, and if you can mention something about best practices within your organization in this field. So please, Anna.
Thank you very much. And it's almost like Karin and I had coordinated before. So thank you very much, Karin. I'm not going to repeat. I agree with absolutely everything you say. But I think internally in our organization, one of the maybe most important discussions has been a reflection about that. Of course, all development cooperation, everything we do has to be green. So that we ensure that we don't put green into a little box on the side. In the same way that we work with gender equality, everything has to be based on equality and so on. At the same time, it's important that you don't lose focus. So, I mean, I think we all recognize that in our work, but an internal debate for us is how do we then ensure that everything we do contributes to a green transition? Well, in very concrete terms, what we've done is internally we have, as I'm sure you do, we have had an environmental policy looking at how we travel and how we calculate our own footprint. But we've elevated that actually into a sustainability policy, so that we look at environment and climate, but we also add other issues to look at the whole sustainability complex, if you will, of our impact as a development organization. We're piloting that currently, and we're happy to share any results or experiences with anyone interested. That's internally. When it comes to our development cooperation on the ground, how we support our partner organizations is, of course, that we support sustainable development, support to sustainable agriculture, for example, and that can be supporting the transition, because everyone isn't farming organic or part even of that market, but we, through our support, can help into that transition. Strong focus on that. And maybe the most important learning, I think, from just the last couple of years, especially during the pandemic, because we've seen the effects so harshly on the ground, is that we're working more and harder than ever with advocacy towards Swedish politicians as an organization in Sweden. Of course, our partner organizations also work in their countries and regions and so on. But we, as a Swedish development organization, have seen the enormous importance about not only informing about the situation for our partner organizations on the ground and how they are living the climate crisis every single day, but also to ensure that their rights are put on a Swedish political agenda. Because when we talk about climate finance, for example, where the Swedish government has promised to double climate financing, we need to try to ensure that that climate finance also reaches smallholder farmers organizations and indigenous farmers organizations, because they are the ones bearing the brunt of the climate crisis on the ground. And we carried out for the first time, I think it's about 6 months ago, something we called I'm going to try to translate this into English, Bondebarometern, like a farmer barometer, like a survey, a global survey, where we asked for our partner organizations' help. So we surveyed 3.5 million smallholder farmers in 20 countries and asked them, one, are you receiving any support from your government to carry out the green transition, etc.? And the overwhelming response from all of them is very little or none. And that, I think, is something that we can do as a Swedish development organization, is to advocate so that that support reaches organized smallholder farmers and indigenous farmers. And remember, smallholder farmers are actually producing, a third of all food we're eating in the world. So it's important to bring them on board also as stakeholders, economic actors, if you wish. I think another finding important to carry with us from that same survey is that every single farmer asked, every single one, talked about the changes of the climate crisis in the past 15 years. Every single one could bear witness to the effects and so on. So what we can do then is to help use that information and transmit it and use it for lobby and advocacy issues and so on. Those are just sort of some overall reflections. But I think the most important is to carry green with us, but ensure that everything we do is green, that we're consequent in our work, and that we also hook it up to sustainability in a broader context. I hope that makes sense. I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you, Anna. Yes, I agree with that we stop to say green as a prefix. we bring with us all the time. Thank you. We enter the last question, so maybe you can, the one of you that will start to answer can just start. And the last question is, how do you see the challenge that may arise between development and production on one hand, and conservation of, for example, biodiversity and ecosystem on the other hand? So if you see a challenge between development and cooperation on one hand, and conservation on the other hand. So which one of you would like to start?
Go ahead, Karin.
Okay. But just to say on best practices, I think one issue that we have been discussing, just to add on a little bit to what Anna was talking about, is of course how to walk the talk ourselves as an organization, and that is building on what you were saying, Anna. And that is of course one issue that we have been discussing a lot is traveling. I mean, inside Sweden, it's easy to say you should go by train, you should use public transportation, etc. But we also have, especially as an environment organization, of course, we have everyone's eyes on us. So we have to look into travels. We are not saying that we shouldn't travel. We need to meet, because one very essential part of having a relationship is, of course, physical meetings. But you need to plan your travels much better. And we will do so that we, for instance, try to represent each other. We try to do one travel to try to be with many different partner organizations at the same time. We try to stay longer, and then we complement with internet solutions. So I think this is something we all have to look into. And there we also have to provide a role model in showing that it is possible, and try to work on symbols, on status, etc. Because this is also something that we meet as a challenge when we work with our partners, that we need to work on our travels, but we also need to inspire them to think of how they are traveling in their situation. So this is one part, and also, of course, what kind of environmental policy you have, etc. But when it comes to your issue, I think it's a very, it's an old issue in its way. You were referring to the Stockholm conference in '72, and this is actually where it really came on the table when we were putting forward the issue on the environmental, and developing countries were saying, well, we agree it's important, but we cannot afford it. And it was actually there the notion on common but differentiated responsibilities emerge, and that is then part of the Rio Declaration and UNFCCC, etc. And I think this is a very important point of departure, that we need, I mean, all of us, poor or rich, need to acknowledge that if we don't care about our planet, there will be no future for any one of us. It will be a very poor future, at least. So everyone needs to do something. But we do have a bigger responsibility as rich countries. But I would also like to add rich people, wherever you live in global south or north and south, and that's why global south and north is also very important in this regard. But secondly, what is also really important when we're talking about these issues is that we cannot say that to poorer communities or countries that you don't have the right to develop. But what we could do is we could really facilitate to help them embark on a sustainable road from the beginning, instead of sort of jumping over the unsustainable road on more coal or more unsustainable commuting, etc. So this is something that is also a very important part of green aid, that is really to facilitate embarking on a more sustainable way from the beginning. And this is a bigger responsibility. And then that is also a responsibility for the governments of these developing countries, because very often, and there we are working a lot with supporting our partner organizations in advocating for this kind of transition in their countries. Also in middle-income countries like South Africa, where we have many partner organizations. So there are a set of different tools to really try to facilitate that we embark on the sustainable path immediately. But of course, there are you need to recognize that there's sometimes there are difficulties in trying to say, should you sort of not use that, cut that forest wood when you don't have anything else for your energy, or using that land or whatever. But I think we need to try to sort of turn the issue around to say that our responsibility is really to facilitate embarking on a sustainable way. I'll leave some word for you, Anna, as well. So.
Yes, Anna.
Thanks. I think maybe the first thing we could say is to also acknowledge that it is difficult. There are no easy solutions in this, or maybe I think some are easier than others, but that everything also has to be analyzed within its own context. I agree, of course, with everything you say, Karin, and maybe just to add on best practices a bit is, of course, the travel issue. In my case, personally, to share that we have, I mean, in my role, you can ask, do I really have to travel? So we've had a discussion about that. You know, yes, of course, the people working directly on programs and work with partner organizations, yes. But we had an internal debate and say, yes, I should now travel to do ABC. And so I'm going on the first trip for 2 years. And with a very specific program that has been sort of, I would say, needs-based from the regions in a way that's never happened before. And I think it's in improvement, but it's not easy when you are trying and you're challenging it into your own personal life. But you have to, because I think the main best practice that we have to carry with us and help each other with is that this is also about values. It's about the future that we want, and we have to live them. There is no sort of, there are no shortcuts, I think, in that. Maybe also mention that what we're doing now, we're sitting in this global meeting, and I'm sure that you had great meetings before the pandemic, but I'm pretty sure that they're better now because we have developed this technology, we've developed methodologies, and we've worked quite a lot in my organization also with digital field visits. And that is actually something new because it's not only replacing old travel, if you want to call it that. It's actually better and more effective in some cases. For example, last year, we were able to travel with the Swedish Foreign Council, the different spokespeople of the different political parties. We're all on the same digital trip to one farmer in Eastern Africa. That would have never been possible to do in real life, if you will. And what was also positive, besides that we had this participation, it was that the farmer on the ground, Celestina, the female farmer who received the group, there were no intermediaries. She was the one with the microphone speaking directly to the Swedish politicians. And it was actually quite fantastic. And that's something we haven't done before or been able to achieve, I think, in our work. So we also see that best practices, we're developing new methodologies that we, of course, want to carry with us as we move forward. Just on can development take place? I mean, we have to look at both people and planet. It's the only way forward. And I think if we go back, there are methodologies in place. Karin, you mentioned agroforestry that we work a lot with. There are others, and they're important. We can't compromise on it. I think maybe that's like we can stop there. Not saying it's easy, but it is a must. So thanks.
Thank you, Anna. Do you, Karin, have any comment on Anna's reflections or?
No, I think we are very much on the same line here. But also echoing what Anna is saying, that we have to recognize that it's not always easy. I think it's important. It isn't easy, and there are conflicts that needs to be dealt with.
Yeah.
But I think that the best thing we can do is trying to come forward with different solutions. And Anna, you mentioned again agroforestry. I mentioned sort of sustainable energy. And there are other examples where we can, our role can be to provide examples of solutions where we actually can find synergies instead of conflicts of interest. That's at least a way of dealing with it. So recognize the difficulty, but then trying to come forward with solutions that are possible to use.
Thank you. Maybe we have some time for some comments or questions from the audience. So I think, Annika, do you have the chat close to you?
So I'd love to contribute with what Anders is writing. Have Anna and Karin something to say about fair trade, which is combining climate sustainability and justice?
I do have. Sorry, Anna. First now.
Go ahead.
No, this is. I should have mentioned it. I was actually the president or the chairman of Fair Trade in Sweden for 10 years. So I worked a lot on that, and I think it's really important. I think fair trade is part of the puzzles. That fair trade is a very important tool and a very good help in empowering people to work on sustainability, and it's also a very good tool for people in Sweden to understand what it's all about, because with it comes also an explanation why you need to buy fair trade instead of other food and products.
I can just add in, and so I totally agree. We're also very proud members of fair trade. And of course, we promote fair trade in Sweden, but also in our development cooperation. So for example, Fair Trade Africa is one of our partner organizations, a technical partner organization in our program in East Africa. So what it means is that we, through our development cooperation, can provide a platform where fair trade works together with, in this case, coffee cooperatives. And so we do, so there are different ways, but I think fair trade is an incredibly important organization.
Yes, do we have another question or comment from the audience?
There is another question about sharing the Bondebarometern, some resources, research and studies that would be interesting for our further learning, please.
I'd love to. I'll look up the link right now and I'll post it in the chat.
Thank you, Anna. Okay. I have one question that I think it was Johan Rockström that once said that if we can fix the livelihood problem, the food production, we can fix the climate. Do you have something to comment on that? If we can fix the production of food in a sustainable way, we solve the climate crisis problem. Do you have a comment on that? It's not a very easy way to of course, introduce the climate issue, but if you have a comment. Food and climate.
Okay, I guess, just start, Anna, please.
Anna, can you please start?
I think it's a great statement, but I also think it maybe makes it, if we simplify a little bit too much, because of course it's about ensuring sustainable food systems where the right to food for everyone is ensured. But we also have to see the structural issues behind it. For example, there are currently, I don't remember if it's 3 or 4 multinational companies, food companies, that control how food is sold, grown, exported, imported, etc. So if we solve the sustainability of the access bit, the right to food, we still have to deal with these economic actors and to regulate economic actors' power over governments and over people. So it's about ensuring a rights-based development, and I think it's important just to take consideration to that, to add that to that great statement by Johan Rockström.
Yeah, and I would like to add that, of course, it depends on what you mean by saying sustainable, because I would say that you need to bring those things on board that you're mentioning, Anna. I guess what you also want to do is really to emphasize the importance of agriculture and the food production system, that depending on how it's being created and built, it will contribute to solving climate change or it will worsen the situation. Mm-hmm. So I guess, but I agree that you need to sort of take in a number of more parameters. But I think it's what you could say, and I would agree that by solving the food system in a sustainable way, including those important issues that Anna mentioned, then you will contribute a lot to also solving the issue of climate change.
Okay. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, thank you, Karin. Thank you, Anna and Karin, for this inspiration you have given us. Before we let Läkarmissionen in, can you please just round off your part, if you have a last comment to us, to SMC, our members and their partners that are in this session today? Do you have something, last thing to say before we let the word to Läkarmissionen?
Absolutely. This time you start, Karin.
You think I should start? I wanted to sort of stay back a bit. No, but I think having also experience of working in organizations that are not don't have the environment as their primary focus, or sort of from the beginning at least, I think it's important to see that it mustn't be that difficult, and you can do it step by step. You don't have to run in the beginning. You can start by walking and putting on your shoes, but it's really important that you try to integrate and try to really see that if you don't integrate the environmental issues within your work, then to the end, it will fail, because we need living and healthy ecosystems, and we cannot live with the accelerating climate change as it's going on. But start by putting on your shoes to walk step by step.
Okay, thank you, Anna.
Thank you. Fantastic ending words, I think, and maybe just to, when you put those shoes on, or these shoes that we're hopefully wearing, I think we all are, or we're trying to at least, is just to thank you all for your commitment, and remember that even if it sounds corny sometimes, it's true. We are stronger together. We're stronger together as organizations. We're stronger together as people. We have the resources. We have the knowledge. We can do this. So it's just to remember that when things are not entirely positive, I think. So thank you very much, and congratulations on your important work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Anna and Karin, for participating and sharing your experiences and thoughts in this session.